When I was around 12 years old, my father bought me a pup tent so I could have sleepovers in the backyard with my best friend, Jimmy. Once it got warm enough outside, Jimmy and I would spend many a night out in the backyard. April of that year on a Friday, I asked Jimmy if he would want to come over and have a campout once more. He happily agreed, of course. About a half hour after he arrived at my house, though, these dark clouds began to roll in. My mom tried to cancel our campout, but after I begged and pleaded with my father, he managed to convince my mom that Jimmy and I would be completely fine. After all, we were just going to be hanging out in the backyard by ourselves. It's not like we were actually going out into the woods or something. I was really excited myself. The storm was just going to make the night that much more enjoyable. Jimmy and I would tell a bunch of scary stories, and it would give a really good freaky ambiance with the storm outside. We watched a bit of television as a bolt of lightning momentarily lit up the sky. It still hadn't begun raining when we went out to the tent, though. If you've never been in a tent when it's storming, you're missing out on a very surreal experience. Even before the rain began to fall, the wind was hitting the tent hard. We could hear it howling all around us. Each crackle of lightning not only lit up the entire sky, but also easily shone through the thin fabric wall of the tent. Well, when the rain finally did begin pouring down, I guess I suddenly understood why my mom didn't want us spending the night out there. That poor little tent got battered by the rain slapping against it. Jimmy and I spent our night doing our best to try and scare each other. We had a flashlight, and the person telling the scary story had to hold it under his chin, to make it seem like it was more scary than it really was. Or at least, more scary than we would admit it really was. There are many reasons I remember that campout in the storm so well. One of them is that this was the very first time I was introduced to some of those classic all-time urban legends. Jimmy told them all. The Hook Man, the one with the headlights and the killer in the back seat, and many, many others. I would say by the time it was fully raining, we had succeeded in scaring the crap out of each other. My dad came out to check on us to make absolutely sure we were okay before he went to bed. Mom was still trying to convince him to make us get back in the house and sleep in my bedroom. My dad understood that we were just having a good time, though. After he knew we were fine and we promised we wouldn't stay up too late, my dad wished us a good night and went back inside the house. About 20 minutes after that, the lights all went off as well, and Jimmy and I had the chance to really scare each other. I wasn't really aware of how much time was passing by as we kept talking and sharing stories back and forth, but it had been quite a while now since everyone else had gone to bed. We were staying up way later than we should have been. All of a sudden, there was a really bright flash of light and a crack of thunder that shook the ground. It wasn't really the thunder that worried me, though. During that very brief bolt of lightning, I'd seen a shadow in our backyard. Since the light was so brief, I hadn't really had much time to make it out through the wall of the tent, but it looked to me like there was a person on the far side of the yard, crouched down against the inside of our wooden fence. Jimmy noticed something was wrong right away, and he asked me what was bothering me. I didn't know what to tell him, though. I thought if I told him I'd seen someone skulking in the backyard, he would begin to panic. Maybe the guy would come at us, realizing we'd noticed he was there or something. I just whispered to him that we may have to go into the house as soon as possible. Before Jimmy even had the opportunity to respond to what I'd told him, though, another brief crack of lightning illuminated the area. I saw the silhouette once more. This time it was standing up and looking toward us. I told Jimmy someone was in the backyard. He didn't believe me, though. I grabbed his hand and told him we had to book it for the house. He still thought I was just trying to get back at him for all those urban legends he'd told me. The next crack of lightning, though, revealed that the man was now right outside our tent. This time, Jimmy couldn't help but see him, and he began to scream. The shadow was now at the door of the tent and began trying to pull the zipper open by force. Jimmy and I began to yell and scream for my father. even though it was very unlikely he would hear us during this storm. What happened next happened so quickly, but I was very glad that it did. The back porch light suddenly turned on. I heard what I first thought was a crack of thunder, but instead it turned out to be my father's gun. The person by the tent made a run for it, but my dad yelled at him that he had no problem putting a bullet in his back if he did. The man stopped in place. The police came and arrested the man. Turns out that the very first crack of lightning that had revealed the man to me at first had also happened to wake my father up. He'd gotten worried about us because the lightning was so strong. He went to check on us, and when he did look out the window, the second crack of lightning then revealed the man to my dad, standing in the backyard. He woke my mom up and told her to call the cops. Then he grabbed his gun out of the safe. Jimmy and I spent the rest of the night in the room, and this time we did it without any arguing. It was quite a while before either of us was comfortable sleeping in a tent again. This story is a different kind of scary, but it is still pretty spooky. This happened back when I was in college, when on a complete whim I hopped on the bus and went down to Daytona Beach for spring break. Well, it wasn't a complete whim, I guess. My friend Joey already happened to be down there, and he'd really been bugging me to come down and join him. Joey really didn't work or go to school, but his parents did have a lot of money. Rather than going down to Daytona for spring break for a week, he was there throughout the entire season. He eventually did convince me to come down when he promised he would bring me back after the week was over. I only had enough money to make the trip one way, if I was going to spend any money there at all. One thing that Joey had left out about our spring break trip is that he had driven his father's motorcycle to get down there. If I wanted to ride back home, it would have to be on the back of his bike. I was not completely comfortable with that arrangement. I did eventually accept it though, because if I spent the rest of my money for a ticket home, I wouldn't be able to have any money for spring break itself. I had a good 5 days or so down there. Then, in order to get back to school on time, Joey would have to take me back home. It would be a 2-day drive, and we would have to get a hotel after the first night. Thankfully, he had his parents' magic credit card and would be paying for everything. We got started relatively early in the day. We went up through Florida and eventually made it into Georgia at around 1 p.m. This is when things started to get a bit ominous. It began to get dark very fast, as the most foreboding storm clouds I had ever seen in my life began to roll in. These weren't just black clouds, these were green clouds, which blocked out the entire sky. It was springtime in Georgia, and by 4 p.m., it was pitch black outside. The only positive was that it hadn't started pouring yet. We wanted to try and make it as far as we could before having to get the hotel room. I had never seen such a sight in my entire life. I really don't think I can do it justice just by describing it. The clouds looked like they were being driven with purpose down on us. I got truly afraid when they started spinning around like funnels right above our heads. I didn't really know if this was indicative of a tornado forming or what, but I could imagine it wasn't a positive thing regardless. Eventually, it began to storm and rain hard. If you've never ridden a motorcycle through a thunderstorm, I can't begin to tell you how scary that is. Each drop of rain slapped us on our faces. My body felt like needles was stabbing into my skin. It hurt real bad. I was worried that the force of the wind and rain would blow our motorcycle off the damn road, but Joey didn't appear to be ready to stop anytime soon. I didn't want to appear like a wuss either, but trust me, I was really scared. We saw a sign for a Holiday Inn at the next exit. It was then that Joey yelled back and asked me if I wanted to take that exit and stop there. I was in severe pain from the storm, and I was cold as well. I was frightened, but I thought about the kind of person Joey was. He was very adventurous, as if you hadn't already figured that out, and for some odd reason, I thought he would have more respect for me if I told him to hold out a bit longer. I yelled back to him, "No, let's see how far we can go before we have to stop." Joey laughed and we continued on. I think we went for another hour or so before Joey decided we were going to have to stop right now. It was just too fierce out there. We found an exit with what I believe was a hotel called Quality Inn or something. We checked in and I decided I needed to take a shower first. Joey was fine with that because he wanted to watch the weather anyways. Joey flipped on the television and of course there was a weather report on right away. I'll never forget in my entire life what it said. The town just off the exit that Joey had asked me if we wanted to stop at was hit just a half hour earlier by that tornado. One of the buildings shown on the news as being completely destroyed, the Holiday Inn we were both going to stay at. We were shocked. If we had taken that exit just an hour ago and checked into that hotel, we would not be here right now. We would have been there right when that tornado destroyed it. It was really weird because I wanted so badly to get out of that storm, but for whatever reason, something told me it was not right to exit at that moment. I live in a small town with my family. I was 19 when this happened. My brother was 13 years old. This happened when he was on spring break from school. My parents had already gone to work, and I had a job too, but I didn't have to go in until later in the day. There was going to be a period of about 4 hours or so after I went to work that my brother would be home alone in the house. That wasn't too big a deal to us though. He was already 13 years old. On this day, I had about an hour before it was time for me to leave for work. It was around 11 a.m., I believe. When I woke up, it was raining and storming very hard. It was pretty fierce out there. The wind was strong and blowing the trees back and forth. The sky was completely black with clouds. It looked more like the sun had recently set rather than recently having risen. The rain was pounding our house too. I was the type who didn't like to get up really long before going to work. I had to be there at 12:30, so I woke up at 11, made myself some coffee, and went into the living room to relax for a while. I was watching a bit of TV, and halfway watching the storm as well, when something outside caught my eye. I looked over, only to see a man out in the middle of the storm, walking down the street. He was tall and dressed in all black, but the weirdest thing was, he didn't seem to have an umbrella or even a raincoat. It was quite strange. I figured maybe he had just been out and about and gotten caught in the storm, but he didn't seem to be in any hurry either. As he walked down the street, he watched our house with a strange look on his face. Then he turned the block. I got a feeling something was wrong here, but I tried not to let it bother me too much. As I was watching the television more, about 10 minutes later, it caught my eye once again. I looked out the window and was quite surprised to see the man wandering around the block once more. Just like the last time, he kept glancing at our house, pivoting his head as he walked along. This time, I was much more concerned than I had been before. Before, the man was just a strange weirdo walking around in the rain. Now he was a strange weirdo walking around in the rain who seemed to have something on his mind. And it seemed to have something to do with my home. At first, I could have dismissed this all as him just having been caught out in the storm, but walking around the block multiple times indicated he was in no hurry to get anywhere. Just a strange man walking in the rain. I had finished my coffee and I had to get to work soon, but I decided I needed to wait and see if the man would circle our house yet again. I was really hoping it wasn't something other than just a weirdo who liked the rain. Maybe he really wasn't singling out our home. Perhaps he was casing every house on the block for an empty one. This was the third time he walked around, once again looking at our home specifically. I got really concerned now. It was exactly like before too. I really wasn't sure what to do in this instance. I didn't think the guy had done anything wrong or illegal, so I couldn't call the police on him, but I didn't feel safe leaving my 13-year-old brother home alone. It was a slim chance, but there was a chance this man was going to try to break in when I left or something. I couldn't take my brother to work with me, so I had to find some other way. When I left, all the cars would be gone from the driveway. That may be exactly what this guy was looking for. After going over it in my head again and again, I decided I was being paranoid enough that I should see if I could drop my brother off at a friend's house. I explained to him that I was worried because something weird was going on here. I asked him if he had anybody who would let him stay until my parents got off work. Thankfully, he did. He called up his friend Dylan, and I dropped him off over there and headed to work myself. I double-checked and made sure everything was locked up tight before I left, too. I was working, and the rain was still coming down violently for hours. We were not very busy because of it. Around 6 p.m., though, I got a call from my mother. Someone truly had broken into our house. I wasn't really surprised, although I did feel like an idiot for not having called the police before. What bothered me the most, though, was not that the house had indeed been broken into. What bothered me is that they didn't steal a single thing, or even touch anything. That told me that the man who broke in wasn't trying to steal our things. When I explained what happened to my parents, they were very happy I hadn't left my little brother in the house alone, because who knows what would have happened to him. I was 18 years old when this happened, in my senior year of high school. I just started dating a girl who lived an hour away in Bogalusa, Louisiana, and would frequently drive out to go see her on the weekends. If you don't know, Bogalusa sits along a river and is surrounded by many swamps. In my opinion, it's an area notorious for heavy fogs and big flooding. It's also quite rural, and it wasn't uncommon for someone to hit a deer or something when traveling to and fro. Being a young driver, my parents would ask I be home no later than 11 p.m. to avoid these accidents. On this particular day, it had rained quite heavily throughout, and at night it would be a particularly foggy trip back home. The first half of the trip was fairly normal. I drove at the posted speeds and occasionally slowed down when I saw eyes in the tree line. This contributed to the eerie air surrounding these drives. It always felt like there was something lurking about, and I was tempted to gun it out of there. The only way I can describe the feeling accurately is to say there was a certain atmosphere of stillness. Lights barely penetrated the fog, it was so thick. The rain had stopped now, and the road was all but abandoned. It was like life had stopped altogether. Time passed, and halfway through the drive, I finally reached a small bit of civilization. A Dollar General store with its lights still on, a railroad track weaving through the road, and just ahead of me a car pulled out of a McDonald's drive-thru. The car went pretty slow, which ticked me off because I had to meet a curfew. I stayed behind it though, in hopes it would just pull off soon. Following down the road, the car and myself left that small town. The path ahead was pitch dark, so I kept following at a good distance and tracked the car's taillights. I was completely exhausted. The car was going so slow it had pushed me past the curfew, and tomorrow I was going to have school anyway. I let my mind wander a bit as I rolled the windows down to get some cold air and kept following behind the car. Minutes passed and I was beginning to get quite frustrated. We approached a railroad track that was slightly uphill, and being in a hurry, I pulled in close behind the car I had followed. Out of nowhere, though, the car in front of me jerked and skidded across the pavement. No more than 8 feet in front of me, I could now see an emaciated figure curled up on the tracks. Pale white, with patchy bald hair, a man rocked back and forth, tearing at his face with his fingers. I quickly threw the steering wheel to avoid him and swung my car around him. Maneuvering as best I could, I managed to dodge the man and slammed on the brakes once I had passed by. The car I was following sped along and out of sight, and now I was alone in the surrounding fog. My heart was racing. I clicked on my hazards and unbuckled my seatbelt. Jutting myself out the window, I stared back at what little the flashing lights could illuminate. Silence. Nothing except the ticking of my blinkers. "Hello?" I gently called out. "Are you all right? I didn't hit you, did I?" In the distance, the man slowly postured himself upright, and his head snapped over to me. He stood there silently, unmoving. Suddenly, he let out the most inhuman scream I'd ever heard. He broke into a full sprint and started running toward my vehicle. I quickly threw the car into drive and sped away from that scene. Not more than a minute later, I found the person I had been following earlier, who had decided to pull over and park on the road and call someone. I approached behind them and yelled out the window, "Did you see that?" "Yeah, I'm going back," the driver responded to me. He'd called the police in the meantime. We eventually went back to where the man had been, but there was nothing there, just an old railroad. To this day, it's still one of the most weird and scary things that's ever happened to me. I always leave my car unlocked. Always. No matter where it is. No matter what I'm doing. No matter how long it'll be. It's always unlocked. The reason for this is because I used to live in a very bad neighborhood. There would always be robberies no matter if you did lock it. Back then, I was a broke-ass college kid though. I didn't have shit for anyone to steal. I also didn't have any money to replace broken windows. I noticed that a lot of people would get their windows smashed in order for people to break into their cars. When I asked around, they told me that the cars with the smashed windows had all been locked, so I left my car unlocked. It's not like I had anything to steal anyway. If they wanted to waste their time rooting around, that's on them. I didn't have any valuables to leave in it, so it's not like I had anything to lose. A few times it had been rummaged through, but I always just cleaned the little mess and moved on with my life. Fast forward to now. I had a closing shift at work about a week ago. I'm a librarian, you see, so I get off at 9 during closing shifts. Not too bad, actually. We all walk out and lock up together. There were 2 parking lots at my library, one in the front where the books were, and one in the back where the labs and computers were. Most of the employees parked in the back, but this particular time I had chosen to park in the front instead. I said goodbye to everyone else and headed out to my car alone. When I finally reached it, I grabbed the handle and pulled. It wouldn't open. For a few moments, I was confused. Then it hit me. My doors were locked now. Instantly, I was unsettled. I got the feeling I was being watched, but I didn't know why. Maybe it was just the weirdness of knowing I hadn't locked the door when I left. I looked around, checked my back seat even, and unlocked it and jumped in. I started and tore out of that parking lot. When I hit the main road home, there was a bit of traffic. It wasn't a lot given the time of night, but it was pretty slow and kept stopping as well. I still had that creeping feeling, but I brushed it off. Surely I had just watched too many horror movies. Then though, as I stopped at a light, I heard a loud screech and a thumping sound. My trunk had just popped open. I waited until I got to a well-lit area to stop. I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station, shaking in my boots. I made sure there were other people around and tiptoed my way over to my trunk. Nothing was in there as I checked, of course, but I did see my things had been moved around to make what looked like a person-sized hiding spot. I might start locking my door from now on. Update. We got feedback on some video surveillance footage at my work. A man who's a bit off that comes into my work a lot got into my car and tinkered around with it for a few minutes. Then he popped my trunk and got in. Apparently he hadn't closed it hard enough to latch it though, so when I stopped it jiggled open. It wasn't just my car either. He'd messed with a couple of other vehicles as well. It seems mine was just the only one that was unlocked.